So, Minister Benjamin Haddad, I'll ask you this first. We had the news overnight of President Trump suddenly halting the supply of arms to Ukraine. Were you surprised by that? And what are your thoughts and your feelings when you hear that news?
Truth, when we hear this news, is that if it's confirmed, it makes achieving peace more complicated. Why? Because the truth is, this will only enhance the aggression of Russia on the ground. There's only one aggressor in this war, it's Russia. And Ukrainians are defending themselves. And by doing so, by the way, they're also defending the security of Europeans. And if you withhold weapons for Ukraine, it actually puts more pressure on Ukraine and less pressure on Russia. The only way to put an end to this war, which is what we want a just and lasting peace, like Ukrainians want, is to put pressure on Russia and to show Russia that victory is impossible.
And you can confirm, as I think the Polish government has done, you had no advance warning of this decision. There was no consultation. And what are your feelings about that?
I would say, the truth is, we've heard what the administration has been saying for a few days now. And, if you take the broader spectrum, the truth is, even though we're still seeing an acceleration of history right now, we've seen for the last 10 to 15 years, U.S. administrations, Democrat like Republicans, saying that they want to disengage from Europe, saying that they want to pivot to Asia, putting protectionist measures, including Democratic administrations, against the Europeans and the European Union.
Yeah.
Clearly, we're facing a turning point in our history where we're going to have to take fate into our own hand, where we're going to have to invest massively into our own defense and security, upgrade our capabilities. This comes first with helping Ukrainians, of course, because this is the foremost security challenge for Europeans, but also taking care of ourselves. We have our allies, the United States, but we also need to be able to take care of ourselves. And I think this is what this moment once again is showing us.
Okay, a turning point in our history, shows the need for a massive increase in our defence investment. Now, the White House, you'll know, are saying, very plainly, they believe that what they're trying to do is put pressure on President Zelensky to come to the negotiating table. From what you're saying, it gives Vladimir Putin an incentive to keep on fighting.
Absolutely. Look, Vladimir Zelensky has been the courageous leader of his nation's war of resistance against aggression for the last 3 years, and we've all admired the way Ukrainians have resisted to aggression. And clearly, once again, there's one aggressor, it's Russia. And the only way to put an end to this war is to put pressure on Russia, maximum economic pressure, military pressure, and then to make sure that when we have a ceasefire, you have really long-term security guarantees, because rushing to a ceasefire with no security guarantees, we've seen what happened in the past for this. It will not be lasting. We don't want this to be just a break, just a truce that Russia can use to rearm and reattack. So once again, when I've been to Ukraine many times, I was there last week with President Zelensky. Ukrainians want peace and they deserve peace, and we want peace like the Trump administration. The question is, how do you set the conditions for just and lasting peace? And this is what France, Europeans, the United Kingdom have been working on, and with President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer have been working on very closely together these last few weeks.
It follows then, Minister, from what you're saying, and tell me if I read you correctly, that without a guarantee of some kind of military support in reserve from America for a coalition of the willing, for those troops on the ground from France, from Britain and elsewhere, without that American guarantee, there will be no ceasefire. There will be no point in deploying that force or putting it together.
We all have an interest in working together and ensuring that we have long-term security guarantees and a peace. Look, if you look at it even from the U.S. standpoint, what kind of messaging will it send to China, to Iran, if tomorrow you abandon Ukraine, if tomorrow you pressure Ukraine into a capitulation? Does that send a message of strength? I don't think so. So once again, instead of rushing to any kind of botched ceasefire, we all have an interest, Europeans and
Yes.
Americans in making sure that it's sustainable in the long run and that it
Yeah.
sends a message of strength. The Trump administration says peace through strength. Then this is, of course, something that we share.
I do understand that. And just to be absolutely clear for people listening, that without that American security guarantee, there can be no ceasefire. There will be no point. It won't happen.
This is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we all have a common interest in making sure that we continue to support Ukrainians and
Yes.
that we put Ukrainians into the best possible position to have a ceasefire that's a long-term and just.
Yes. So look, could there be a coalition of the willing, involving France, involving Britain, and other countries too, maybe Canada, maybe others? Is it possible that could be deployed if there's a ceasefire with no American guarantee? Could that happen?
We are not today in the scenario where we are even discussing these security guarantees because we don't have a ceasefire,
Right.
because we don't have an end of hostilities. So I think first we need to focus and we want to keep the dialogue with our American partners and keep the US anchored to this because it is in the interest of both Europeans and the US. And that was really the purpose of that conversation on Monday, to continue to find the best conditions for a ceasefire. But once
Right.
again, as I said, this is also not just the decision of last night, but really what we've seen the last few weeks, few months, few years, a turning point in this European security architectures where Europeans will have, in a generational way, to take on more responsibility for their own defense and security.
Okay. So I mean, the object is to keep on working for the best possible outcome, whatever the situation is, however it may change. A more technical question, if you like. Now, some of your French missile technology, it relies on American technical support, doesn't it? Do you see any possibility or risk of Washington withholding that support?
Well, look, I mean, without going into technical details
Sure,
that I
sure.
would leave to my fellows in the military or the Defense Department, your question raises indeed a very important question. This is why we support the question of building up an autonomous European defense industry and making sure that European financial instruments support that have what we call
Yeah.
European preference. They support European weapons. Why? Because first, I mean, if we want in the long run to continue to increase our defense budgets, which is our objective, we need to show our population that it trickles down in terms of jobs, factories, investment.
Yeah.
Number one. Number
Yeah.
two, indeed, because you want to keep the technological know-how if you want to be able to continue to invest and continue to upgrade their capabilities. And number three, because you want to be able to have freedom of use. And it's true that when you buy weapons or components outside of Europe, then you have restrictions in how you use them. We've
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
this in Ukraine when
Yes.
France or the UK were sending long-range missiles to Ukraine. Of course, there was the question of the limitation on the use on dip strikes in Russian territory. To be able to respond to Russian targets that were striking into Ukraine, striking Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian infrastructure, because you had components coming from the United States. So indeed, the question must be asked of supporting the European defense industry, also because you want to have the freedom of use. You know that on Thursday, we'll have a very important European summit on defense financing and
Yes.
capabilities, organized by the European Commission. And this is why, once again, we're advocating that the financing goes in a preferential way to building up the European defense industry and giving long-term visibility to our industrial companies, to our companies, so that they can step up their capabilities.
Now, Minister, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, now has famously said and dismissed the possibility of, he described 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. As a Frenchman, did you find that offensive?
Look, I am not interested in joining a verbal escalation in a transatlantic debate. I think we have common interest in working together. I would just, underline that French troops have made great commitment and sacrifice to the security of Europe and the West, fighting terrorism in the Sahel and in Africa, fighting also alongside U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. We've had also, of course, British soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that French troops have also admired the the courage and the engagement of American soldiers that they fought alongside. And our
Yes.
two nations have a great history of working together on military issues, going back centuries, going back
Yes.
actually the foundation of the United States. And I
Mm.
think this has always been a story of mutual respect and mutual cooperation, and this is what's important.
Okay, now, I spoke yesterday, Minister, to a NATO Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. It was General Sir Richard Sheriff. Now, he told me that after what we've seen over recent days, that we cannot count on America any longer as an ally. Can you understand why he would say that?
Fundamentally, the United States is the ally of Europe. But as I said earlier, however you answer that question, the conclusion is exactly the same. We need to take our destiny into our own hand. We need to upgrade massively our military capabilities. We need to read the writing on the wall. The time of the peace dividends, the time of the 90s, the times where we could reduce defense spending and invest in something else is over. And this is not just something that, you take stock of in a few days or in a week. This is really, as President Macron has said, the effort of 5 to 10 years of continuing to increase not only our national defense budgets, but also finding the sources of financing resources at the European level. Let me give you an example. You know that during COVID, at the European level, at a time where everyone said that we would divide, that we would go to our national roots, on the contrary, we managed to overcome historical taboos and create common borrowing at 750 billion euros to invest in the recovery of our
Yeah. Yeah.
economies. This next generation EU plan, as was well known. Well, some might argue that we're facing another existential moment
Yes.
for Europe, and that we need to pull resources in the same way and to be able to invest commonly in defense. President von der Leyen has talked of several hundred billions of potential resources for defense that will be announced on Thursday from both existing funds, loans, simplifying some of the rules on fiscal spending. I think all this is really welcome, and it
Yeah.
has to be a long-term engagement.
Okay, last
Okay,
question.
last question in a word.
If and when
we have a coalition of the willing minister,
who should command
it? Should it be Britain? Should it be France?
You're getting me into really tricky waters here. Look, without getting, of course, into these details, I will say that it really needs to be commended, the quality of the dialogue and the cooperation between our two countries in the last few weeks. I think that the UK is part of the defense and security of Europe. This is something that President Macron cares very deeply about. He's created, I think, a very strong working relationship with Prime Minister Starmer, and clearly, we have a common interest. We defend common values, and we need to continue to work together for the security of Europe and the support of Ukraine.
Minister, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.